Welcome to Mom's Writers Club. Today we are talking about writing sex scenes. And I wore a special shirt just for this. Reading is sexy. Writing is sexy today. So I'm Jessica.
And I'm Sarah.
And let's get started. Oh, before we do, please give us a quick like and subscribe. Before we get started, though, we have a few things we should probably mention. I write thrillers.
And I write women's fiction. Neither of us are romance authors.
Yeah, that said, I think that gives us a different viewpoint of it because we have written sex scenes, and a lot of people who do not write romance novels want to write sex scenes. We also would like to say we are both cis, het, white women. So just kind of be aware of that as we're going through this. We are going to be talking about heterosexual type sex scenes. And while there is a lot of overlap, we also recognize that we are not including everything, but that's where our experience is. In our opinion, it is best to get yourself set up for success. And this will depend on you. But for me, I wait until everyone is the fuck asleep. So I will not be interrupted by my 3-year-old going, mommy, mommy, mommy. Or as happened last time, singing, what did she sing? Like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Oh, Old MacDonald. That's what she was singing. I'm like in the middle of this like intense sex scene. It's just like, Old MacDonald.
Sometimes the cognitive dissonance is just overwhelming. Yeah. With the rest of your life.
What do you do to get set up, Sarah?
For a long time, I did the same thing. I either waited until everybody was asleep or I put the do not disturb sign on my door and I enforced it. I was like, they'd come in the door. This is when they were like 9 or 10 or something like that. And they'd come in the door and I'd be like, later. And the thing is, after a while, I realized people cannot tell what's going on.
They can tell because I turn bright red the whole time I'm writing the sex scene. I'm like, in fact, I'm bright red right now, but this is how I look when I write a sex scene. I could be writing a sex scene right now.
No, but I mean, if you need privacy, get privacy.
Light a candle.
Yeah. I've kind of gotten to the point where I can do it, or I can do it in public.
There will be many sex jokes on this episode, so
lots of giggling
number
today.
1.
You know, like at a coffee shop or something where nobody knows me. Just kind of, I like.
Oh my gosh, I can't.
Want to make sure that my screen isn't facing anybody, just so in case someone's eavesdropping on my screen.
All right, so set yourself up for success in a coffee shop, in public, or by yourself,
wherever you're comfortable, you know,
make yourself happy. I like kind of slipped in another sex joke there. Nobody got it. And I'm a little sad.
Make yourself happy.
Yeah. Or by yourself, make yourself happy. It wasn't a zinger.
Myself.
As far as setting yourself up for success, you know, be in a situation you're comfortable in. If you need to be like in a private area, if you need your kids to be asleep, whatever, do what you need to do, set yourself up. The other thing I would say is if you are unsure, read some sex scenes and read several of them because they're all done very differently. I have read some where I'm like, well, that was dumb. And then I've read other ones where I'm like, whew, you know, so like find what works for you. And if you read more of them, you'll kind of get a feel for what you like and kind of what you think might fit for you.
When we were thinking about like, how are we going to talk about this topic? We were thinking there's kind of 2 components when you're writing a sex scene. And we're sort of talking about kissing scenes too. We're going to get into kissing scenes too, because that's like a little, you know, there's some similarities. One is like what's going on inside the character, like in their emotions, in their body, like how their body feels, how they're, you know, how they feel emotionally, what they're thinking, how it's affecting them, what they're hoping to get out of it, you know, stuff like that, all this internal stuff. And then there's the outer workings of the scene, which is like literally what's happening with arms and legs and fingers and tongues and stuff.
Things.
You know, like what the actual sort of physical mechanics of the thing are. And it's like, and like, it depends kind of on your genre, what you're writing, or like kind of how the scene fits into your story. Like you may have more of the inner workings, you may have more of the outer workings.
So to clarify, regardless of whether you're talking about a kissing scene or a sex scene, what we are saying is that there's the inner part and then the external part, and that you have to kind of be writing both of them at the same time. So now we're going to talk a little bit about each one. Depending on what kind of book you're writing, you may be focusing more on one or the other. One sex scene to the next might vary a little bit, but it is important to keep that in mind. For example, if you are writing a romance novel and them having sex is like a big deal in their relationship, there's probably a lot of internal thought going on about it.
Mm-hmm. But you got to keep it in balance too, because you've probably read scenes before where it's like you're in the middle of this nice sex scene and then all of a sudden you get like 3 paragraphs of the character like reflecting on something or other or thinking about some complicated thought or emotion that they're having. And you're like, wait a minute, like my potatoes are getting cold over here.
Potatoes are getting cold.
You know, and like you got it. So it's like, I feel like a sex scene is very immediate. Like you're very in the scene, you're very in the action. And it's tricky because you do have to have some of that internal stuff going on because otherwise it's like, I don't know. I mean, there's many right ways to write a sex scene. If you're writing a really steamy romance or erotica or something like that, maybe you're just going to go on for pages and pages about the outer workings of the scene and like the 14 different positions they're using and like all the stuff.
So I really like something, Sarah, that you said to me when we were recently revising the chapter. You said that sex scenes are in some ways a lot like fighting scenes. You talked about how in the middle of a fighting scene, you wouldn't like stop the action to spend 3 paragraphs reflecting on something, or it like really pulls the reader out of the moment. Yeah. So just as I think that just is like a really good example of how like, yes, you want some of that internal stuff, but at the same time, you have to keep the focus also on what they're doing and what's happening.
Right.
Anyway, I thought that was a really good way to like wrap my head around it.
Yeah, I made a good point there, didn't
you
I?
You did. Good job.
Thanks.
One thing that we talked about was the outcome of the sex scene. Now, in real life, it's never this simple. It's never like, oh, we had sex and now we're in a relationship. At least rarely does life work out that way. But in books, it often does or does not. And both of those things can have ramifications on what's happening in the plot as well as the character. So it's good to have an idea of like what the character hopes to get out of it, what they actually get out of it, how it affects their character arc, the other character's arc, and also the overall plot.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, what does the scene change? Like what changes after you come out of this scene? If you are making love to your partner who you've been with for 23 years, maybe not much changes after you have sex with them. But a lot changes after the first time you have sex with a person, and the second and third, usually, you know, like it's a big part of developing intimacy, or it can be, and it often is in books. So yeah, so like what changes? How are things different between those characters after this scene? I was going to say, can you sort of see that coming in the scene?
One thing I have found to be very important in writing sex scenes is just like in ideal, at least real sex, or in any chapter or in any book, you want like that slow build up, unless you don't. Like if you're doing a quickie, okay, fine, that's a different thing. But when you're writing it, like take a look at some of the sex scenes that you like have read in books that you've liked or that you think it were done well. Probably they didn't go from like 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. Your reader like will have a certain expectation. I do think to some extent, especially in like the romance category, readers are kind of reading it to kind of be in that character's head and like experience those things along with them. And so you want to slowly build it up and create tension and pull the reader along through that chapter, just like you would with anything, just like with a thriller. You have that same tension building. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's similar to action scenes in books.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, because like a lot of, you know, you hear a lot, like if you have an action scene, like on your first page, your reader doesn't necessarily know anything about the character or care about them. You may have a fantastic action scene, but they just may not be invested in, you know, what happens to this person. They don't even know.
You're welcome, honey.
You're wonderful and you're that listener.
Thank you. Did you hear that?
We're gonna leave that in. You're wonderful and what?
You're a wonderful nurse practitioner.
Oh,
I love you. Good night. She's supposed to be asleep, but she hit her leg and came to me. And
it is good, I think, for your reader to have some investment in the character and in the relationship and to start wanting it. Like when we were talking about this earlier, I remembered something that's in Story Genius by Lisa Cronin. She talks about, I think this is in her book, right, where she talks about like the neuroscience of
yes.
Fiction, and how we read fiction to kind of like go to like become the character and like kind of go on this vicarious adventure with them.
People
and feel
want to go
what
on
they're
your
feeling
adventure with you.
and and experience what they're experiencing, like almost viscerally, like almost in your brain, as if it's happening to you. It's kind of more gratifying if you like build some tension and you build some investment and get your reader into the mind and the body of your character. Okay.
How explicit to go?
Yeah, a lot of people had questions about this. Yeah.
Okay, so I wrote a sex scene into one of my thrillers. It's no longer in that thriller because it just didn't work anymore. But one of my big questions was, how explicit do I go? Because this is not a romance novel. It was kind of a subplot at the time. It's not anymore. But I really had to like think about it and make that decision on how explicit to go. I did a fade to black, but that didn't mean that like I didn't have any content in there. There was like romance buildup, there was kissing, there was some touching and like back and forth, not dirty talk, but like kind of that warm up talk to having sex. And then it becomes clear that's what they're about to do. And then I did a fade to black. In my other book, I literally just said they fucked and then they fucked again and like left it at that. And that's what worked well for these particular thriller novels. But like, Sarah, what have you done?
My debut book, which is coming out in March, has fairly explicit sex scenes. They're not long. They're only a couple pages long, but you definitely get a pretty good view of what's happening. And that was really fun. It was really fun. And it really fit the characters and and it fit with with this character that I was writing, who's like just a very visceral person. Like she's just very in her life and she's very intense and kind of driven. And then the second one that I just finished recently also has a love story and also has sex, but I did it it wasn't exactly fade to black, but it was definitely a little less explicit. It like got kind of up to the beginning and then it sort of poetically faded out.
I thought it was great.
But you did there was some explicit content in there too.
I was thinking about how I decided to kind of do more of a fade to black in the books that I've written and like how to make the decision of like how explicit to get. So with Sarah's, there's a relatively strong romance arc. And I thought it made a lot of sense that she would, have more of that in there. For mine, the sex didn't really change anything in the plot.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't feel like it was as needed. And also, at least in the book that I ended up cutting it out of, because it just wasn't necessary. It was not like integral to just the overall plot in general. Like I didn't feel like it actually accomplished anything. And I think that that's one thing to keep in mind when you decide how explicit to be and how much page space to give it, basically.
Yeah. No, it's a really, really good point. Like the more those two characters having sex does in the plot and in the character arcs, maybe the more it belongs on the page, and the less it does, maybe the less. It would be awkward to be reading a book where the two characters have sex and there's a big long sex scene, but it doesn't change anything about the plot, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, why did I just read all that stuff?
Yeah, it like goes back to that rule of like every chapter and every scene should have a purpose.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
making sure that it really does. So, do we have more to say about genre considerations, or do you think we covered it?
I don't know if I can really address genre considerations. My genre is so broad, and people do such a wide variety of things in it. There are not a lot of conventions. Some people get very explicit. Some people don't have any sex at all in women's fiction.
Yeah.
Some people don't have like a romance thread at all, or a love story at all in women's fiction. So there's a lot of ways it can go, which is one of the things I like about it. I get to kind of just do me and fit into this very broad range of things. Romance writers will know way more about, their heat level than I have anything to say about.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking, like, in regards to what you said about how women's fiction is like really broad with how much sex is in it. I really don't know of a whole lot of thrillers that explicitly have sex scenes. I know of a few mysteries that are more like series based. So you're really seeing these same characters long term, and they're like forming relationships over like multiple books.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that potentially makes a little more sense. And then, yeah, you've got the whole romance genre, which Sarah and I don't write romance. We're not being published with romance. So that even in romance, it varies greatly though, because there's a lot of like clean romance out there or sweet romance where there's no sex. And honestly, that's kind of something we don't know much about, just putting it out there.
Yeah, we might title this sex scenes for non-romance authors.
Non-romance, that's a great one. Whereas like the other romance I read, like there are at least 3 sex scenes and they're great. And they're like, the pages are dedicated to them. And that's a big part of that book. So it can really vary even in the romance genre.
Yeah.
Okay. So being realistic or not, and I love this. I'm going to just go ahead and like out myself here. I love mafia romances. They're like so bad and so wonderful at the same time. And the sex scenes are not very realistic in my opinion. Or maybe I am just missing out. I don't know. See, I'm blushing. Anyway.
No, I think there's a lot of sort of fantasy sex out there. And
that's okay. Like
books.
A lot of any type of book has a lot of like kind of unrealistic stuff.
I know. I mean, the thing that I've been trying to do that I don't have a lot of models for is, and actually I thought of one. I thought there's an author called Jane Smiley. She won the Pulitzer Prize for a book called 1,000 Acres. And she's written a lot of great books. I love her. And she wrote a book called Good Faith. And it's just a story about these people in a town and their relationships and stuff like that. And this guy and this woman are having a relationship. And she writes very explicit sex scenes in this book, which, like, she is a fairly literary author, but she's very grounded. She wrote one of my favorite books in the entire world. Is called Horse Heaven. And she wrote that. It's just marvelous. Anyway, so, what I've been trying to do with women's fiction, book club, contemporary, upmarket, whatever you want to call it, is to write sex scenes that are like satisfying and fun, but also real. Because I feel like in the literary fiction I've been reading for years and years, sex was starting to get very clinical and kind of depressing. And it was all about like conflict and distance and how people don't talk to each other, or, it was really uncomfortable, like a lot of the time.
Sex can be uncomfortable. I wonder if that was their goal,
Well, and it probably was their goal. And I was just about to say, in an effort to be real, they wrote these very uncomfortable kind of cringy sex scenes. Which maybe were very real, but there's also a lot of people out there having good sex. And so, I wanted a model of writing, of how to write a sex scene that seemed very real and authentic. Like this could really be two like regular people, not like fantasy mafia romance characters, having sex, but also like having good sex. So I don't know. That has been my my project of the last 5 or 6 years.
I think you've done a great job at your project of the last 5 or 6 years.
Thank you.
I like finding a fun in between where it's not overly fantasized, but maybe a little.
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave it at that. Okay.
We do
So,
want to live vicariously through literature. And I do
yes,
not want to live vicariously through any more of those literary sex scenes. They were just like, man, like,
this is not hot. That's all I'm saying.
yeah, not for me. I
Although
don't want to live through that cringy moment.
in their defense, I'm betting that their goal was not to create a hot sex scene, whereas
no,
like the
no.
mafia romance authors, like their goal is to suck you in and like completely, okay, I'm gonna shut up now. So
No, I'm sure that they accomplished their goal, which was to make you cringe at
yeah.
the raw and uncomfortable intimacy of sex between two people who maybe are not totally grooving with each other.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
they succeeded. But I was tired of that. And there were like these two poles, and I wanted to find something in the middle, which involves being real and being real about your characters, but it also involves like trying to write a gratifying sex scene.
This is only vaguely related to what you just said. Before we started recording this, I had this goal of looking up sex jokes to like insert. Oh, I just made one to insert. And I'm really sad I didn't look any up now because I feel like we could punctuate this with like 5 funny sex jokes.
Oh, I have a sex joke.
Oh, let's hear it.
Okay. All right. So there's this old bull and there's this like young bull, and they're up on the hill and they're looking down at this field full of cows. And the young bull is like, oh, I'm going to run down that hill and I'm going to fuck one of those cows. And the old bull is like, nah, son, we're going to walk down that hill and we're going to fuck all those cows.
So I'm really looking forward to this next part of our episode on sex. Sarah and I were working on something that involved word choices and
agreeing on word choices
and disagreeing on word choices.
And Jess and I are very frank with one another. We have been critique partners for several years. I trust her to tell me exactly what she thinks about any given thing.
And I do, and then I apologize. I'm sorry.
And then sometimes I'm like, Jess, can you say nicer than that? No, I'm just kidding.
These are the things I loved. I just forgot to mention all of those. There are far more of those. I'm sorry.
No. This is the good thing, because I know when we are having a debate about something that I am getting Jess's unfiltered opinion.
One of my
that you more or less think that you're getting mine, because you usually
I do. I usually.
I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, sometimes I haven't worked something out in my head.
Is our relationship built on lies? Okay, so
yeah, we have had some fun arguing over what
I'm trying to remember what the first. Can I say the first?
What words to use when writing a sex scene? What was the first one? Oh God, Jess, get a hold of yourself.
I can't.
What was it? I don't even remember.
Oh my God. The C word.
Oh, you're just starting right in on the big one, aren't you?
We could not do this one if you don't want to.
Okay. No, I have strong feelings about this, actually.
Hold on. Let me build it up for everybody.
Okay.
Can you tell I grew up in conservative Kansas on the Bible Belt? Okay. I'm in Washington State now. I can do this.
You can do this. You're a big girl. Big girl pants on.
Panties or not panties? That's a whole different topic.
That was another question that we had.
Okay. So
I was like, why on earth would you not call them panties?
Okay, but apparently it's sexist to call them panties. And I call them panties because I like feeling sexy in my underwear. But I also don't want to offend anyone.
They're little pants. It's like when you call somebody like
I think it's because we're minimizing women, because like men's little pants are called briefs, whereas with women they're panties. I don't know. I would actually, and this is me being completely honest and not judgmental, I want it explained to me because I want to understand, because I am 110% feminist and I just I don't get it, but I want to. So please tell me what I'm missing.
Not every diminutive is diminishing. That's what I'll say. But we're going to get into an area where diminutives are diminishing. So
okay, but
okay.
Okay. All right. So men get power words like cock and dick for their penis.
So this is like
Women,
fundamental to writing a sex scene. You have these two, parts of the body that are very important, and you need to call them something, right? And as Jess was saying,
penis and vagina. Men get cock and dick, and there are a few others in there. Women, meanwhile, what do we have?
We have pussy and coochie and my kitty and down there. And
then the C word, which I'm not saying.
And there's lots of other ones. Like I looked up when we were talking about this, I looked up a couple of lists online, these great big long lists of slang words in English for vagina. And they were all either diminutive or food.
Yeah. Or like just cutesy.
Like
so the point was
cake.
Holy fuck, that's awful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
really
we wanted a power word for a vagina, and we were
Right.
like, there really isn't one. I mean, we could like make one up, but even then, like, and I even looked at some of my mafia romance books because those are some badass women in there. Yeah. And I was not super satisfied with anything I found.
What was she calling them in those?
I really don't recall offhand. Although in the most recent one by this particular author, she did go like a little more clinical and she called it her vagina, and it actually read really well. But
it's not a bad word. Vagina's not a bad word.
No, it's not.
I mean, it's not like,
it's not.
I don't
hot,
mean that like a bad word,
hot.
but like.
We wanted a power word, and like the closest thing we could come up with was the C word, which I don't really want to use. I don't really like that word. I've only heard it used in a negative way.
Really a shame, and I hope over time that women can reclaim that word, because I actually kind of think it's a great word, and it has so many negative connotations because people have used it negatively and have used it abusively and as an insult, as something hurtful. I just sort of think it would be cool if it got reclaimed and we could use it, because it's a punchy word.
While we're on this topic, if you have any good suggestions, please drop them below, because I want to know what they are. I would love to know some good words that you have found or heard or read.
I would like a one-syllable word that does not end in an E sound.
Or anything cutesy.
Yeah.
So that was one word we debated. Yeah. I wrote a scene that involved the word crush, or crushed, as in he crushed me to his chest. And that is not something I have a negative association with. To me, that is like someone passionately grabbing you and like holding you against them, but in a willing, like nobody's like being physically assaulted when this is happening. This is two people who both have agreed
passionate
to
feelings. Oh, consensual.
It's a consensual like grabbing, and like a woman could crush a man to her chest. It's not about power. It's not about abuse. It's not that you're actually physically crushing them. Yeah. However, whichever side you're on.
Yeah, but like weirdly, it was not a word that I liked or found sexy at all or romantic at all. It felt like when somebody hugs you too hard and it kind of hurts and it's kind of uncomfortable and you want to get out of it. Or like when someone shakes your hand and they shake your hand too hard and it hurts. There was something about it that felt one-sided. Like the person who was doing the crushing was getting what they wanted out of it, but the person who was being crushed was being crushed. So I don't know. I mean, and we had a long talk about this and we worked it out. But
there have been a couple other words too. I was trying to remember what they were. But
lips, smashing lips.
Sounds hot to me.
It does not sound hot
but
to me.
You can both smash at the same time.
Smashing something. I'm like, I don't want to touch it.
Taste they didn't
it.
fully
What? You don't like taste? Oh, come on. There's so much taste in sex. There is. Really? Oh my God, I love it. Taste, smell? No? Is it all going to be just the in and out? Are we doing the old in out?
No. I love smelling my husband, but like I'm gonna just stop.
Yeah, let's not get into spouses.
Your word choice is really important, and it can really give flavor to the entire experience. So whereas I would write a sex scene using words like smashed or crushed, that would bother Sarah. So she would use lips brushing and tasting or something. But those, and I'm kind of making fun, but I'm being serious too. Like it creates different vibes.
I have, so what I've settled on, and this is just me, is that I just like, okay, so speaking of lips smashing and brushing and covering each other and all the ways that people describe kissing.
Covering each other?
His mouth covered mine, or his lips.
Oh, here we go, guys.
Think about all the ways that people describe kissing. His lips smashed against mine.
Or our lips pressed together. What is wrong with that?
Well, that's one of the better ones, but
wait, just get to the point. What do you prefer?
Kiss. Just it's a good word. It's a fine word.
I know. But if they're having sex and they're kissing 18 times, do they really kiss 18 times? Or do their lips brush?
But
do
you
just crush?
I think that's where you get into the other senses. You're kissing, and this is what you're feeling, and this is what you're tasting and smelling, and this is what you're feeling inside your body, and all that stuff. Instead of coming up with a fucking Roget's thesaurus for like,
you're the one with the giant fucking thesaurus. Together.
But I just sometimes reading sex scenes, I start feeling like the author just felt like they had to keep coming up with new words for things because they didn't want to keep repeating the same word, and I just can't.
Yeah, I don't like that, but I like to say that lips do things besides kiss, and I'll just leave it at that.
Oh God, well then we get into the whole body parts doing things on their own debate, which we have debated.
Oh my God. Okay, this is my habit. Sorry, my eye is really twitchy this week. I like to write things like
his fingers climbed up her back and into her hair.
Yes, I get that. I'm just imagining, is it Thing from Addams Family, or is it? Yeah, right. But also, like, I always do it with eyes. Like his eyes moved across the room, because he's looking across the room. Now I'm like,
bye eyes.
Now I'm so hyper aware of it that I'm like, backspace.
I think a lot of people do it, and it probably doesn't bother a lot of people, but
it doesn't bother me.
It's something that I struggle with a little bit. I'm like, no. The eyes didn't do that. The person did that with their eyes. He brushed his lips against my cheek is different from his lips brushed against my cheek.
But if she's perceiving it, she wouldn't perceive it necessarily as he is brushing his lips on me. It would be his lips are brushing me, like that's what I would think. Like if my husband leaned down and kissed me, I wouldn't think my husband is brushing his lips against me. I think his lips are brushing against my cheek.
There's some lips doing a thing.
Moving on.
Yeah, that wasn't a good.
I want to write a serial killer book now where they cut body parts off and
get into a little horror.
No, I really respect horror.
The hand brushed the hair from my face.
Oh my God, first date gone wrong. Here's the thing. I know it's hard to sit down and write your first sex scene because it was so hard for me to do that.
So this is for those of you who may not have really written a sex scene yet, or who are just dipping your toes into it or thinking about it.
Nobody has to see it. Ever. Nobody ever has to see it. Turn your Wi-Fi off if you're super paranoid. Write your sex scene. Nobody has to see it except you. And if you hate it,
delete it. Delete the whole thing when you're done.
Who cares? Nobody ever has to see it. And you know what? It'll probably, first of all, don't delete it. Save it at least till the next day. It'll turn out better than you think it will. You'll get better with practice. The big thing for me with scenes like this, any important scene, sex scene, fight scene, whatever, is revision. So keep in mind, your first draft of it is literally just a rough draft. You can go back and add better sensory details. You can use more language or less language. You can have lips smash or whatever. So don't worry about it. Nobody has to see it but you. Just give it a shot.
When I was first starting the book, which will be my debut book, and this was 6 or 7 years ago when this character came to me and this sort of general outlines of the story, I knew that there was going to be some sex in it. And I was like, ooh, I'm a grown woman now. I can write a sex scene. That's awesome. I will confess that I started out absolutely letting it rip. I wrote the gnarliest, most erotic sex scenes just because I felt like it, not because I thought that's what the book needed, but I was like, this new thing I'm trying out.
That
And
sounds
I'm
so
learning how to do
freeing.
this new thing. What's
Yeah,
that?
that sounds
It
really
was so
freeing and
freeing.
fun.
It was like, I want to like experience my range here. Like, how down and dirty can I get with this?
Apparently
And it was really fun. You know, those scenes that wound up in the book finally years later were not nearly that specific, explicit, and they were much more like emotionally connected. But like now I know I can do it. Like I just got used to that. It's not like there's a, you know, there go monsters, you know, sign on my map of what I can write.
So we have a bunch of questions that we are going to answer. I'm not going to name names. I feel weird naming names on this. So one person asked, I struggle to find the balance between physicality and dialogue while writing sex because I want to build their emotional connection using dialogue, but at some point it's not realistic because no one has conversation during sex, at least to my knowledge. I like to have a little bit sprinkled here and there, but for me, I focus more on the physical parts of emotional bonding, things like their eyes meet and maybe they say one thing. And like building intimacy into little moments like that. And I leave most of the conversation for before or after. But I have read a sex scene that had more talk and it was actually really hot. It was largely about what they were physically doing. What do you think?
I think people do get into foreplay while still talking. I think it's nice to sprinkle a little bit of spoken dialogue into a sex scene, even if it's just a word here and there, like Jess was saying. But there are also other ways that you can have people communicate, like even just a word, like in response to what's happening or asking for something. I also think internal dialogue or internal, interiority is good in this situation. The free indirect speech where you basically have the character just like speaking, but not out loud, you know, they're sort of talking to themselves in a way. That can be really useful. So you kind of know what's going on in a very concise way. Okay. But it's a tricky balance. You don't just want to read about body parts for like 3 pages.
Yeah. And the other thing is like, that's something you can revise. Cause I'll bet if you write that scene and put in the right amount or what feels like the right amount and come back a week later without looking at it, you'll probably have a different opinion on if it's enough or if it's too much or if you need more, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So another person asks how to mentally overcome your fear that your grandmother, boss, neighbor, kids, teacher will read the scene so that you can actually write something that is satisfying for the reader. This is not helpful at all. But I basically just decided one day that I just don't give a fuck. Like, I just don't care.
Right.
And the other thing is like, I've met authors and I never am like, oh, they wrote that sex scene. You know what they're doing, you know?
No, it's really true.
And the other thing is like, I know that like for me as a thriller author and also being a nurse, I really worried about that. At some point, I just kind of got used to that and knew that they would see it as fiction. I also write with a pen name, so.
You cannot let those people read your book if you're not comfortable with it. I have never quite gotten over the slightly cringy feeling of like, I'm giving this person my book to read and it's got some sexy parts. Like I gave my book to my brother and sister and I was like, it's got some sexy parts. And they're like, that's okay. And like when they came back and we talked about the book, they were like, we weren't talking about the sex scenes. I think at some point they were like, a couple people I've given my book to are like, wow, you're really good at writing sex scenes. And that was about all I got. Awesome. And I was like, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. It's another part of being a writer.
And I think it's worth examining, like, are we comfortable if we write a fight scene where people are hurting each other or killing each other? Yeah, like, are we uncomfortable with our relatives reading that? You know?
Which is like
close to two people making love.
Yeah, which is a wonderful thing.
You know, it goes back to that same like double standard where it's like, you know, lots of violence in movies is fine, but like you put like explicit sex in movies, all of a sudden, like we are as a culture, we are like morally okay with a lot of violence. We are not morally okay with sex, which is ridiculous.
Write a sex scene for you. Don't write a sex scene for anyone else, and then get rid of what you don't want. Oh, okay. Hold on. We have to go back to that other topic we had because I had a funny anecdote to share. the one about mentally overcoming the fear that like various people in your life will read your book. I read a Twitter post by someone that was like, basically they took a Sharpie and took a physical copy of their book and either ripped out the pages or like blacked out all the pages, the lines that they didn't want their grandmother reading. And then they're like, here you go, now you can read it.
Redacted.
Yeah, I thought that was so fucking hilarious. Like on one hand, like that's awesome. And on one hand, it's like, oh. Jessna asked best tips on where and how to start researching which agents fit your work best. So we do have a couple episodes specifically on querying. So I would highly recommend taking a look at those. If you look through our various playlists, there's like a playlist just on querying, and you'll find that there. My favorite places were manuscriptwishlist.com or mswishlist.com. There are two different websites. They pull from Twitter and like the things that agents have specifically posted. And I also liked Query Tracker. I liked Googling my genre and like top agents in thriller.
Mm-hmm.
And I also would go to like conferences specifically like for my genre and see what agents were attending, and then look at what the website of those
conferences. Yeah,
I found so many agents on there that I did not find through other means, because not all agents are on manuscript wishlist. Not all agents use Twitter.
Right.
So those were some of the best ways I found it. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
And if you can cough up $25 for a month of Publishers Marketplace,
yeah,
that is a great way to find. It's really super searchable by genre and agent and agency and recent deals and all this stuff, you know, for agents who are representing books that are like yours. They have a thing, you know, who represents, like you just fill in a book title and it'll tell you who represents that books, you know. So and looking in the acknowledgments of books that you liked or books that are like yours, go to Barnes and Noble, flip to the acknowledgments, and people almost always think they're agent, and if they don't,
then don't query them.
Then,
my agent and her assistant are the first two people thanked in my acknowledgments. So I will totally agree with that. So then we had one other question from Heather, but I actually think it's going to be its own episode, so we're going to hold off Heather. Otherwise, I think that is everything. I hope you enjoyed our steamy romance conversation.
I think there was more giggly than steamy.
It was super giggly, and I'm totally fine with it. Anyway, please give us a like and a subscribe. We have our chats every other Wednesday night on Twitter. You can find me at author Jess Payne.
And I am at Sarah Reed Author.
And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.